We have eaten the fruit, baby. And what is that fruit? The fruit is Apple. The fruit is the device that we put in front of our heads, and we look down and we look down and we look down and we look down, and we're absorbed, we're sucked into it, and we are taken into the informational vortex. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to watch Scott Galloway drop some absolute truth bombs on the TED audience. Let's get into it.
I start us with a question. Do we love our children? Sounds like an illegitimate question, right? Well, I'm going to try and convince you otherwise. Essentially, as we go down generations, we're seeing that for the last 2 generations, people are making less money on an inflation-adjusted basis. In addition, the cost of buying a home, the cost of pursuing education continues to skyrocket. So the purchasing power, the prosperity is inversely correlated to age. Simply put, as we get younger, we're taking away opportunity and prosperity from our youngest. The social contract that is now no longer in place, and for the first time in the US's history, a 30-year-old is no longer doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. This is a breakdown in the fundamental agreement we have with any society, and it creates rage and shame. As a result, people over the age of 55 feel pretty good about America, but less than 1 in 5 people under the age of 34 feel very good about America. This creates an incendiary. Righteous movements, cuts to our society end up becoming opportunistic infections because generally speaking, young people have a warranted envy, they're pissed off, and they're angry that they don't enjoy the same spoils and prosperity that were provided to our generation.
And if I want to add a little bit more analysis as to why this has happened, part of the reason is there's a generational divide with regards to the developmental benchmarks that you're supposed to be hitting at certain ages. Here's a model for what's going on. We have created a longer period of adolescence.
I'm talking about through our technology, through the gamification of society via our algorithms. In many ways, the digital environment is far more fun, and it's much more difficult to create a boundary or structure around separating oneself that prevent one from falling victim to their addictions. That is the consequence of creating godlike technology. We all become children.
Because it's harder to quote-unquote attain the same level of wealth today as a young person as it was in the past, these older generations are looking at young people and they're like, you're lazy, you're stupid. What people in the older generation fail to realize is if their generation were in the same position as ours, they would be struggling just as much as we are.
A decent proxy for how much we value youth labor is minimum wage, and we've kept it purposely pretty low. If it had just kept pace with productivity, it'd be about $23 a share, but we've decided to purposely keep it low. Out of reach, median home price has skyrocketed relative to median household income. As a result, pre-pandemic, the average mortgage payment was $1,100. It's now $2,300 because of an acceleration in interest rates and the fact that the average home has gone from $290,000 to $420,000. By the way, the most expensive homes in the world, based on this metric, are number 3, Vancouver. Why? Because 60% of the cost of building a home goes to permits. Because guess what? The incumbents that own assets have weaponized government to make it very difficult for new entrants to ever get their own assets, thereby elevating their own net worth.
Yes, and this is an important point because generally the issue of wealth being consolidated within older generations isn't so much of a problem because we're not just an individual society, we're a family society. That's a point that Milton Friedman made.
Society, we tend to talk about an individualist society, but it really isn't. It's a family society.
So the idea is that older generations are accumulating wealth and they eventually pass that money down to the younger generations. Unfortunately, we have this issue where community and family is being fragmented. Certain younger generations are being cut off from their old generations for one reason or another. I think it's just a matter of miscommunication and not being able to really come to terms with what's going on in the macro level exponential changes taking place. And these divides are fragmenting the wealth. It's disturbing the generational transfer of wealth from old to young. So the wealth is just accumulating more and more and more and more in the older generations. The older generations don't trust the younger generations to use that money because the perception is you guys are stupid, you guys are stupid, you guys aren't ready to handle this money. Okay, continue.
This is the transfer I'm going to be speaking about. This has resulted in an enormous transfer of wealth where people over the age of 70 used to control 19% of household income versus people under the age of 40 used to control 12. Their wealth has been cut in half. This isn't by accident, it's purposeful. The transfer has been purposeful. While the cohorts, corporations, and the ultra-wealthy continue to garner more and more of our wealth, we have decided, I know, if they win the gold, let's give them the silver and the bronze, and let's lower their taxes. This transfer is purposeful. It's not by accident. And it works. Senior poverty is way down, and we should celebrate that. Meanwhile, child poverty is flat to up. The third rail, I'm going to talk about Social Security. It would cost $11 billion to expand the child tax credit, but that got stripped out of the infrastructure bill. But the additional $135 billion a year to Social Security, that flies right through Congress. And every year we transfer $1.4 trillion from a cohort that is increasingly doing less well to the cohort that is the wealthiest cohort in the history of this planet. We have fallen under this mythology that somehow it's this great social program. No, it's not. It's the great transfer of wealth from young to old.
I think the hope with a transfer of wealth from young to old is that you're consolidating the wealth within the wiser forms of the species, people who know how to maximize the utility of that wealth, and that it will eventually be passed down generationally over time once wealth has accrued. But there needs to be an intergenerational recognition of what's taking place and an agreement and almost these kinds of communicational vows. From what I can see, that's not happening. There's a lot of discord between parents and their children across all generations. And the reason that has happened is that we are within a time that no longer supports the economic frameworks of the past. This can't be fun for any of the generations. Like you have the older generations where the wealth is accumulated, okay? And that makes sense. You're looking down the ladder and you're like, what's wrong with you people? Like, why can't you figure it out? And so you start to hold disdain for younger generations. You also start to feel pride, excessive amounts of pride for your own end. Like, oh, I'm the wealthy person, I must have done something right. The people on the lower end are looking at how rapidly technology has changed and how the dynamics of this social infrastructure has evolved. And they look at what the old people are doing and they're like, okay, yeah, you guys have all the wealth because you've had all that time, but you don't know anything about this world. The world has left you behind and you're still faxing your emails back and forth. And so there's this, it's a really odd dynamic where you have the money consolidated within the generations that don't know how to actually solve the problems of the modern era. Tools divide us. I mean, we think about tools helping us as a civilization because we're empowered to maximize our efficiency and our output and all of these things. But tools fundamentally are markers of delineation across generation. And when the inventions span the distance between the fax machine and the iPhone, or the automobile and the internet, it's really tough to unite the people who are harnessing those different tools. Let's continue.
We're economically attacking the young, but I know, let's attack their emotional and mental well-being. Let's take advantage of the fact of the flaws in our species with medieval institutions, Paleolithic instincts, and godlike technology. I'm just going to say, I think Mark Zuckerberg has done more damage to young people in our nation while making more money than any person in history.
But he is not trying to do that. You might say Mark Zuckerberg was not as concerned with the humanitarian aspects or the humanitarian challenges that would emerge due to the implementation of his technology. I know people perceive this guy as some alien and he's out to do no good and he's a fundamentally evil person. I don't view Mark Zuckerberg in that way. Mark Zuckerberg has become this iconic evil symbol because there aren't systems around him to hold his inventions accountable.
All right, this all adds up to a bunch of graphs all headed up and to the right. And what are they? What's the first one? Oh, that's self-harm rates, which have exploded, especially among girls, since my colleague Jonathan Haidt pointed out it's really gone crazy since social went on mobile. What's the next one? Teens with depression. The next one, men and women not having sex. Biggest fear of my parents.
Oh yeah, that's a big issue too. People are asking the question, like, why are young people not having children? They're not interested in reproduction. They're not understanding each other. Hey, to me, the underlying source of that is once again the departure from nature, the leaving of nature, the separation of us from nature. We have eaten the fruit, baby. And what is that fruit? The fruit is Apple. The fruit is the device that we put in front of our heads, and we look down and we look down and we look down and we look down. We're absorbed. We're sucked into it, and we are taken into the informational vortex.
Next graph. Obesity, way up. By the way, the industrial food complex wants to addict you to shitty, fatty food so they can hand you over to the industrial diabetes complex. We should not romanticize obesity. You're not finding your fucking truth. You're finding diabetes. Overdose.
Yeah, and man, shots fired at that whole fat acceptance movement. But what that is, and like, fat acceptance is about people wanting to find community. Everyone needs something that makes them feel deeply bonded. And if you're disconnected from God, you're disconnected from your family, you're disconnected from your society, what are you going to latch on to in order to find that community? These shared physical characteristics or identity characteristics. Oh, he's gay, I'm gay, that makes us a community. When it's actually a very superficial feature that would normally not bind people, except in times of deep isolation.
Overdose deaths, way up. Deaths of despair. When I was in high school, it was drunk driving. Now it's kids killing themselves. Young people don't want to have kids anymore. 2/3 of people aged 30 to 34, able-bodied, used to decide to have at least one child. It's been cut in half. It's now less than a third, 27%. As a result, people over the age of 60 in the US, pretty happy. People under the age of 30, not so much. Some of the lowest in the free world. What can we do? Nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with it. We got the hard stuff figured out. There are programs to address all of these issues. They cost a lot of money. That's the hard part. And we have figured this out. In just 5 minutes post an earnings call, we can add $250 billion to the economy. We've got the hard part figured out, the resources. We have the money, but we decide not to do it. This is per capita spending on childcare in the United States relative to other nations. This is housing permits. Things are doable. We increase minimum wage to $25 an hour. It goes into the economy. The wonderful things about low and middle income households is they spend all their money. We have to restore a progressive tax structure with alternative minimum tax on corporations and wealthy individuals. We need to refund the IRS. We need to reform Social Security. It should be based on whether you need the money, not on how old you are. We need a negative income tax. My friend Andrew Yang screwed up a great idea, but he branded it incorrectly. Instead of calling it UBI, he should have got Republicans on board by calling it a negative income tax.
I love this idea. UBI has all these bad stigmas, and it just seems like this free handout. But yeah, rebranding it as a negative income tax, something that Milton Friedman was in full agreement with.
The proposal for a negative income tax is a proposal to help poor people by giving them money, which is what they need, rather than as now, by requiring them to come before a governmental official, detail all their assets and their liabilities, and be told that you may spend X dollars on rent, Y dollars on food, etc., and then be given a handout.
That would be a great way of getting conservatives and libertarians on board. For people who don't know about the negative income tax, let's say there's $12,000 per year of an income threshold, and someone brings in only $6,000, and the negative income tax is 50%. You would actually take 50% of the difference between 12,000 and 6,000, which is 6,000, which would be 3,000. So there would be a $3,000 negative income tax on the difference between $12,000 and $6,000 earned. And that's more money in the pockets of low-income households. Like, that's what we want. That's what people are talking about. Notice in this scenario, there isn't a disincentive preventing people from working, because if you are earning more income, it's actually better off. But the negative income tax is at least bringing you up toward the minimum. This is very different from the way a lot of welfare programs are structured, because there is a threshold where if you earn above that threshold, some of your welfare privileges are stripped. So if you're going to earn an extra $2,000 above $34,000 income, but that extra $2,000 actually cuts into your welfare privileges by $5,000, then you don't have an incentive to make that extra $2,000. And you don't even have an incentive to make an extra $4,000. And so it keeps people perpetually at that low point of earning. I think I've said this on the channel before. I'm not a huge fan of minimum wage increases because there are differential effects based on region. If you're in Berkeley, California, or New York City, the $25 minimum wage might make a lot of sense. But if you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Pierce, South Dakota, or Helena, Montana, it's a different story. My suspicion is if you were to skyrocket a federal minimum wage within those states, it would do a lot of damage to small businesses. Small businesses that are just trying to get off the ground can't afford to pay their employees that much. So how do you create, a wage structure where the people within the the regions where higher economic compensation is warranted are getting that, whereas people within the areas where there isn't as much built-up urbanization are getting wages where their businesses can continue to flourish. Cost of living is not going to be completely equal across all geographic locales, and a federal minimum wage makes that assumption.
We need to eliminate the capital gains tax deduction. When did we decide that the money that capital earns is more noble than the money that sweat earns?
Amen to that. It's never made any sense. Why would you want to disincentivize labor, by the way? If you want people to work less, then you tax it at 100%. If you want people to work more, you tax it at 0%. If you want people to spend less on unnecessary items or to be taxed more on excessive purchases, then create consumption taxes. If you're going to have the money to afford a Lamborghini, tax the people who can afford a Lamborghini. Tax them when they want to buy something absurd. Like, we need values that we're promoting within our tax structure. And if the United States is going to be a more universally prosperous nation, we have to tax conspicuous consumption far more than what we are doing. Conspicuous consumption, not like buying milk and eggs from the grocery store. That's common consumption. Private jets, luxury items, luxury watches. Wealthy people want nice shit, and they can have nice shit, but that's where you tax them. I don't get how we haven't figured this out.
We need to remove 230 protection for all algorithmically elevated content. We need identity verification. The reason we can have identity verification is because we have a First Amendment.
Yeah, it's going to be hugely important in this era of AI. Identity verification. Holy smokes. How are you going to know that I am the author of this content?
We need income-based affirmative action. Any visible signs of affirmative action make no sense at all. You would rather be born gay or non-white in the United States today than poor, and that's a sign of our progress and our need to recalibrate who we give advantage to. Affirmative action, of which I'm a beneficiary of, I got Pell Grants, I got unfair advantage. Affirmative action is a wonderful thing, and it should be based on color. It should be based on green, how much money you have or don't have. Ban phones in schools, invest in third places, big brothers and sisters programs. We need national service. We need to tell people in the United States and Canada that they live in the greatest countries in the world, and we need to remind them of that every day by exposing them to other great Americans where they feel connected tissue. We can do all of this. We can do all of it. We have the resources. The question is, do we have the will? This is my last slide. It is an emotionally manipulative slide to try and get you to like me more. But it does have a message. This is the whole shooting match. Anybody here without kids, ask someone with kids. You have your world of work, you have your world of friends, you have your world of kids. Something happens here, your whole world shrinks to this. So I present, as I wrap here, with just a few questions. One, if you acknowledge that our kids are the most important thing in our lives, that everything else we do here is meaningful, but our kids' well-being and prosperity is profound. If you acknowledge that they're doing more poorly than previous generations, if you believe there's a chance that the illusion of complexity has done nothing but provide cloud cover for the unbelievable transfer of goodwill, of well-being, and of prosperity from young to old, and if you believe we can actually fix these problems and we have the resources, then I present to you, I posit, I augur the question that I hope has more veracity than it did 17 minutes and 24 seconds ago. And that's the following question. Do we love our children? My name is Scott Galloway. I teach at NYU, and I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you.
Good fucking shit. I'm glad this is blown up. I hope it continues to blow up. And I hope some old geezers can take some action.